Good afternoon. Welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Krayden, broadcasting live from Ottawa. A little later than usual this morning with a lot of information to gather and a lot of things to consider right now. So we'll be back in mere moments to discuss what is going on in the Middle East. Is this the beginning of a cataclysm?
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
We need political change. But we also need to resolve to resist. Yes, we need the resolve to resist. Please like this station. We're continuing to endure the suppression of YouTube and other forces. Thanks for watching today. We have a lot, as I said, to discuss. I want to just run through a couple of things here before we get to some interesting video. And I don't think we can ignore the elephant in the room today. And we have to discuss this war because it's potentially going to engulf the entire world. Yes, this could be the Third World War. It could have started yesterday, June 21st, 2025, which actually was my birthday. I didn't mention that yesterday, but I'll remember this date. That's for sure. And I think all of you will too. Let's hope and pray this thing doesn't escalate any further. But the likelihood of it doing so is very strong. And I think it's much more important to discuss this possibility than doing another promo piece on Vasi Capella's latest interview. But that's just me. Here's Mark Carney's take on this. And I thought, yeah, not so bad. Iran's nuclear program is a grave threat to international security, and Canada has been consistently clear that Iran can never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. Yeah, that's the basic talking point. While U.S. military action taken last night was designed to alleviate that threat, the situation in the Middle East remains highly volatile. No kidding. Stability in the region is a priority. Well, there hasn't been stability in that region since 1948. Canada calls on parties to return immediately to the negotiating table and reach a diplomatic solution to end this crisis. As G7 leaders agreed in Kananaskis, the resolution of the Iranian crisis should lead to a broader de-escalation of hostilities in the Middle East, including a ceasefire in Gaza. Well, that's all very, very good to say that. But at least he's not saying, hit Tehran, get them again. Regime change. At least he's not going there because believe me, a regime change will necessitate, and I hate to use the expression, boots on the ground, but it will. You don't do that simply by bombing people. You have to have the army on the ground, and that's going to lead to chaos, millions of refugees, decades of instability that's even worse than today. I think we can all realize that, okay? And it's pretty clear. One of the immediate consequences of this war has been the shutting down of the Straits of Hormuz, which means oil tankers aren't going to be able to get through. And here I've got this little video here shows you these are oil tankers in the Straits of Hormuz. This is how incredible the activity is. So if you think this isn't going to affect you, well, my God, it could affect you if this thing goes global, but it's going to affect you immediately, or at least in the next couple of weeks, as the price of gas goes up, because the supply and demand, there's going to be demand that will stay the same. Supply is going to diminish greatly. Supply will diminish. Let's have a little more look. Iranian prime voted to close Strait of Hormuz, and there it is, right there. Now that's going to bottleneck, not just more than bottleneck, it's going to block shipments of oil. Incredible activity going on there. And once again, people who think Iran is just some little country in the Middle East, it's 90 million people there. They have a very sophisticated military, and it's a large country. So, and central to the whole area. This is not going to be a replay of Iraq. Well, it will. To some degree, it will, because Iraq was a disaster ultimately. And I have to tell you, and this illustrates exactly how much material is going through there. And this is going to lead to incredible shortage of gasoline. You won't see it. You won't see it today. You won't. See, but I would suggest get some gas. If you got gas jerry cans in your garage, fill them up. Fill up the car. Yeah, I know it's not. It's not. It's a short-term solution because this thing could go on for quite a while. They're calling this Operation Midnight Hammer, this American strike last night against Iran. And we'll have Donald Trump on here in a minute. I don't mean he's got a guest on my show, but we'll have his announcement. There's interesting dynamics going on in that announcement. Elon Musk put this up and then took it down because obviously maybe he thought it was too inflammatory. It says Iran wants war. Look how close they put their country to our military bases. Look how many military bases the United States has around, literally almost encircling Iran, except for the northern border. They've got American bases on the eastern border, the western border, and the southern border. Now count them up. There's probably about two, three dozen here, which is Donald Trump is putting his own country in incredible danger. And the troops and personnel. You know how I stand on this. I want peace in the region because I know how quickly war escalates. And as I've told you so many times, I am a guy who used to write the propaganda. And this is what we're going to be seeing right now for the next weeks or months or however long this thing lasts. We're going to be seeing propaganda from the mainstream media, propaganda from all the governments involved, both sides, of course. But the United States deliberately lied about this, saying Donald Trump was going to have a 2-week pause. I even wrote an article for Human Events about that, saying, this is an opportunity, I said, during this 2 weeks, Donald Trump can refocus on domestic issues such as the deportation of illegals, such as reducing government waste, such as focusing on eliminating the toxicity of DEI and everything else. And he was just talking about finally looking after these poor people in North Carolina and Georgia and other states that were affected by the hurricanes last fall. So he was focusing on this, but it was all a ruse just to have another surprise attack on Iran. But like I said, I wrote the propaganda points for NATO. I wrote the propaganda points for why we need to have another war. And I supported every American war in the past. I deeply regretted that then Prime Minister John Krystal would not send troops to Iraq like Great Britain did. I said, that's so cowardly. Why can't we should be sending troops to Iraq? Let's get into this thing. And there was a time I would have been cheerleading for this strike on Iran, but no more. Because I'll tell you why. Because the people who benefit from this are the military industrial complex folks at Raytheon, at Boeing, at General Dynamics, at Northrop Grumman, or Grumman Northrop, excuse me. These are the people who benefit from these wars because they expend a lot of weaponry and they have to keep replenishing it. It makes billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars for these people. And they've never seen a war they didn't like. And that's really what it's all about. But I want other people to state their opinion on this. And by the way, this is interesting. Colonel Douglas McGregor retweeted this last night. Iran is saying that the Fordo nuclear reactor, if you will, was evacuated several months ago. It's been completely emptied. And this is why the International Atomic Energy Agency is saying they can find no evidence of radiation leaks or increase in radiation levels. So all I'm saying here is that don't believe everything you read or see. Obviously, this is an audience that doesn't do that. Test it. Be skeptical. You're going to be told a lot of lies. You always are during wartime. Look at the First World War. From the beginning of that conflict, the media was bought and paid for by the governments that represented the countries they worked for. So every week, for instance, the London Times would be talking about big push going on the Western Front, huge advances made by Allied troops. And it was all lies, all utter fabrication. And of course, the German press did the same thing. They were talking about huge advances and the war was going so well. And it was going well for nobody, actually, especially the soldiers who were sitting in trenches, sometimes waist deep in mud and water, surrounded by rats and dead, can't say that, corpses. It was no fun for those people. And you have to wonder, what were they fighting for in the First World War? This was a war between cousins, and it was crazy. However, here's Donald Trump explaining last night. I'll keep the editorial opinions to a minimum. You all know I have supported Donald Trump on just about everything he's done. The exception, I have parted ways with him on tariffs. I parted ways with him on the expensive budget for the Pentagon, but I've always supported Donald Trump. I have written probably 100 columns since 2016 praising Donald Trump, exhorting people to support him across the borders. But here he is talking and just trying to justify this strike against Iran.
Thank you very much. A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
Donald, does J.D. Vance look like he's really in agreement here? This is J.D. Vance who opposed the war in Ukraine or American aid for the war in Ukraine. He wanted to see conflict stop. And this is Donald Trump, who ran on a peace platform. Let us not forget that. The MAGA coalition, the Make America Great Again coalition, is made up of a lot of people who once voted Democrat, made up of a lot of people who were sick of the neocon warmongering, who wanted to see a president impose peace, not war, upon the world, who wanted a president who would work towards peace and stop getting the United States involved in every foreign war it saw. Donald Trump has done the exact opposite here. Now, it's funny, you've got the 3 guys behind him. You've got J.D. Vance, the vice president. You've got the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio has always been a neocon. Pete Hegseth, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, this is another guy who really wanted to work for peace and to stop international war, foreign wars for the United States.
Here. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel. And God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
There they all go. Now, yeah, there's been thousands of U.S. military personnel who have been killed or maimed by roadside bombs. How about the million or so Iraqis who died in that Iraq war? Or how about the casualties that were inflicted by the U.S.? No, that's not important, but Donald Trump wants to invoke God at the end of that, saying God is behind this. Military leaders always invoke God, no matter whose side they represent. It's no everything here is happening as it always has happened during a war. But so Donald Trump came short of advocating for a regime change, which was wise. But he's basically saying we're going to pound Iran into the ground. You know, we've heard this before. We'll pave it over. We'll send them back to the Stone Age. That's what they said about Vietnam. Remember that? And he's fallen short of saying they're going to depose the current regime. But he's basically saying unconditional surrender. So what does that do for Iran? If Iran is close to producing a nuclear bomb, that's going to make them work harder, because they're going to say, hey, North Korea produced a nuclear bomb and the United States let them do it, and now they no longer bother them. So don't you think that's going to push Iran in the direction of nuclear weapons when you talk like that? Of course it will. But here's some very interesting conversation led by Saagar and Jetty, with whom I used to work at the Daily Caller. And I think this is a very reasonable conversation.
The reason I think that we're all doing this right now is this is it. You know, the die is cast. Like, it's we're at war with Iran, and there's really just no getting around that very simple statement. At this point,
we have not declared war on Iran, and we are waiting for the White House to even muster the legal justification, though if it exists. If they point to anything, it will be dubious at the very, very best.
I'm really glad you highlighted that, because that's something that I think we should all really spend a lot of time on. I mean, this is one of the most extraordinary and aggressive, independent, unilateral actions launched by a president of the United States ever. And I'm struck by that. I'm struck by, in my opinion, just such a foolhardy decision, given I mean, the consequences that are unfortunately very likely to come.
Has to be said, there's been turmoil and there's been plenty of war in the Middle East since the creation of Israel in 1948. And yes, many times Israel had to defend itself from its Arab neighbors. But in every case, whether it's the 67 Six-Day War, the 73 Yom Kippur War, all of the other wars between Israel and Lebanon, and when they went into Lebanon to get the Palestinian Liberation Organization, it was always a proxy war. The United States was never directly involved in a fight like this, in a war like this. So
we have
very,
thousands and thousands of U.S. service members. The Straits of Hormuz is at risk. We have a naval base in Bahrain. We have air bases and U.S. military bases in Iraq. And I spent my whole career and have met so many people who've suffered in the global war on terror, and it's really just terrifying, to think that we're right back, and it's totally unnecessary.
And let me just explain some of how this went down. Just tracking from the beginning. So first we had the revelation that Israel had bombed a bunch of sites in Iran. The initial reaction from the Trump administration, from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, was to feign effectively surprise and say, oh, well, this was a completely unilateral action. Very shortly thereafter, it became clear from Trump himself that he was claiming credit for it. And they put out to the press that actually all of their recent attempts at diplomacy and the claim that they were going forward with this next round of nuclear diplomacy talks, that this was actually a ruse to create an ability for this Israeli surprise attack. Since then, we've had this whole will they or won't they, very reality show-esque, theater put on from Trump, where he's seeking the advice from this one and different things are being leaked to the press and all sorts of misinformation. And really, the propaganda effort kicks into full effect. Suddenly, even though our Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, at the end of March, told us the Iranians are not close to a nuclear weapon, they are not pursuing a nuclear weapon. The IAEA says the same thing. We have no evidence that the Iranians are pursuing a nuclear weapon. But suddenly Trump and Fox News and CNN to a great extent as well, suddenly it's Iran is on the brink of a nuclear weapon. This is taken as effectively a fact. Very WMD, Iraq war. The vibes are, off the charts. And so you get this drumbeat going. And the question that the president of the United States, is asking the American people isn't, hey, do you want a regime change? Which, based on the reporting, is what we have actually greenlit. And the logic, that we're headed on already. I mean, even all the strikes in Tehran, there weren't nuclear facilities in Tehran. So what are we doing there? So the question that's being asked of the American people from the president isn't, hey, do you want to get involved in another idiotic, disastrous, morally atrocious, illegal regime change war? It's, Iran's about to have a nuke. We can't let them have a nuke. And from there, the logic flows to this moment when we directly engage. But I don't want anyone to be fooled by the idea that we weren't already involved, that this operation hadn't already been greenlit. We know from Reuters, we know from Ken Klippenstein, that the regime change operation had already been greenlit by Trump. And I think a lot of the machinations that we've seen going back and forth over this ensuing time period has been mostly for show. This was the intention effectively all along.
And Krystal, just to add to that point real quickly, you said that, as Tulsi Gabbard said, that the nuclear program was not up and running. What she also said is that it had not been running since 2003.
Right.
Khomeini shut it down in 2003. That's the intelligence assessment, that it has been dormant for more than 20 years. And the intelligence community believed that it remained dormant. I think there's one piece of news that I wanted to put up here that emerged today, which is relevant to this, which is Amwaj Media. Really, really impressive. They have a ton of sources very close to senior leaders in Iran. They reported today that the supreme leader assembled what's called as you see it here, the Assembly of Experts. This is in Iran's constitution. This is how they, and I'll scroll this up so if anybody wants to pause and read this. This is how they they determine their successor. They've got this little 88-member clerical council. They sit down, they come up with candidates that are going to replace the supreme leader, and then they pick one, and that becomes the new supreme leader. So Khamenei is saying here, like, okay, this might be it for me. Like, I'm going to take Israel and the United States at their word. You know, after this hospital was hit yesterday, the day before, Israeli President Herzog was saying, like, okay, Khamenei cannot live any longer. And there have been all of these, reports that Khamenei is going to be killed by the Israelis, but Trump has been holding him back. We don't know whether or not we can believe any of this because, we're in the fog of like intentional disinformation.
Intentional disinformation. Yes, that's exactly what I was referring to. This is the fog of war. And this is what happens. This is a fascinating little clip from Mike Benz, who I think a lot of you know. He's a former intel officer. This guy really understands the machinations of the deep state. And I'm just trying to find this for you here. All right. There you go. Interesting.
What is happening right now is unbelievably identical to the plot of Top Gun Maverick, the Oscar-nominated Best Picture of the Year in 2022. This has been an obsession of mine all week. I've been meaning to make this video all week, and I just saw Fox News reference it last night. So let me give you the proper treatment. We're going to go through this scene by scene. We're going to do a movie watch chronologically through the movie, and as you watch these scenes, remember that the whole plot is to use bunker buster bombs using stealth bombers through the mountainous region of a Middle East country in order to blow up its nuclear plant. Here's what the final scene looks like at the climax of the film, for example. Now, something troubled me when this movie first came out, and I'm just going to play this scene. It's at the 19-minute mark of the movie where they're setting out the whole plot of why they're doing this operation.
The target is an unsanctioned uranium enrichment plant built in violation of a multilateral NATO treaty. The uranium produced there represents a direct threat to our allies in the region.
Now, when I first watched this on an airplane in 2022 as just something to do to kill time, I thought that was a very strange plot choice because this whole operation to use bunker buster bombs and risk American lives to blow up a nuclear plant in the Middle East was because the nuclear plant represented a direct threat to our allies. Like, the military generals did not even say it was a threat to the United States. The operation was because the plant was a threat to our allies.
The uranium produced there represents a direct threat to our allies in the region.
So again, the plot of the movie,
I find this just incredible. I mean, how about all of you? That's very true. And I saw this movie. In fact, I was probably one of the first people in line to watch it. But I did think at the time, why is this not a direct threat to the United States? And I think Mike Benz is quite right here.
Is because the nuclear plant in the mountains of an undisclosed Middle East country represents a direct threat to our allies in the region. They don't say it's to the United States. I thought that was very, very strange to come at the 19-minute mark of a 2-hour movie as they're setting up the whole plot.
The uranium produced there represents a direct threat to our allies in the region. The Pentagon has tasked us with assembling a strike team and taking it out before it becomes fully operational.
So again, the plot is the Pentagon has been tasked to set up a strike force to launch a preemptive strike against this facility to take it out before it becomes fully operational. So this is without a war being declared. This is presumably without this country having launched an attack. This is a preemptive strike against a facility that is doing nuclear uranium enrichment to take it out before it becomes fully operational.
That's just incredible. And I think he's quite right. Do you get the sense that we're watching a war unfold like it's reality TV? This started essentially with the first Gulf War, when the media were on scene waiting for the war to start. And it's very frightening how this is unfolding, because this is like a movie, except it's not. People are going to perish in this exercise. People are going to die in huge numbers. And the bombs are real. The despair, the carnage is real. People are going to suffer on both sides, but largely right now on the side of Iran. And these are going to, and they're not all evil people in Iran. Yes, it's the government is not something we'd ever want to live under, but the people have the right to live and they choose and to make their own choices for whatever government they want. And this is absolutely surreal. That's all I can say. It's like I feel like like these people behind it think this is all a game. And this is why I say the journalists love this. Mainstream media journalists, they love the getting accreditation and going over, and they lose all sense of objectivity as soon as they're on the ground. And they stand around watching bombs drop like it's a fireworks show. They've been doing that since the first Gulf War. The Vietnam War, journalists were allowed to go out and cover it independently. And of course, that's the last time they were ever allowed to do that, because they showed the war to people. Every night, people watched soldiers being shot at and maimed, and the violence and the mayhem and the chaos. They saw it every night, sometimes while they were eating dinner on the 6 o'clock news, Walter Cronkite. But the journalists were allowed to fashion their own narrative. It wasn't one invented by, imposed by the Pentagon or the administration. Yeah, they got daily briefings and they were lied to constantly about the body counts, about progress. The end is near. We can see light at the end of the tunnel. And they knew it was lies, and they reported that eventually. But what we're seeing here in Iran is a continuation of this. Let's co-opt the media because they just love the wars. It's great for ratings. Well, I'll tell you what, it might be great for ratings until the whole superstructure collapses and we're left with death and destruction everywhere. This is a former Russian intel agent who works in the United States now. Her accent is very bizarre. It's a combination of Bronx and Russian. But she has some interesting observations to make about this war. And I'll put her on for a couple of minutes here.
So you have to understand why Iran wants a nuclear weapon. And it is not for the reason that most Western commentators and so-called experts say that it does. Iran does not want to destroy Israel. Yes, they do say that periodically, right? To galvanize their people, to keep that whole hatred going. But they may be homicidal, but they are not suicidal. The reason why they want to have a nuclear weapon, and in fact, it's a good time for me to put in my intelligence analysis here. My assessment is Iran already has a couple of hot ones, if you will, right? Just a couple. You can count it on one hand. The reason is not to destroy Israel, is not to destroy America.
Nobody else has said this, so I don't know how much credence to put into this. I put this on just so you're aware that this woman is saying it, and no, she's not a crank, she's not a kook. She has a genuine history of intel in the United States as well as coming from Russia. So she understands the situation. So she's saying they have perhaps 2 or 3 nuclear bombs already. I don't know if that's true. However, if it is, this could become very horrible very fast.
The reason is deterrence, to put the fear of God in domestic opposition, right? that is the reason why most dictators want, not the Russian guy, not Putin, but people like Saddam Hussein. Remember, he was himself kind of boasting that he had WMD. The reason is they want to appear 10 feet tall, okay, to preserve the regime's survivability. They want to have that claim, and also they have huge egos, all of these dictators. So nuclear weapons is a huge status symbol. It signals to the rest of the world, you are a major power to be reckoned with, and it is a security hedge, a security guarantee. Why, Putin is not afraid to really go after Ukraine. Ukraine has no nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. Why President Biden did not originally, when he was in good cognitive condition, which, we don't know exactly when that time was, but he was warning about nuclear Armageddon, and he was not going to authorize long-range missiles to be given to Ukraine and to use against Russia, is because he knew, right? It's only at the end of his presidency, when someone else was, pulling the strings, mm-hmm. that they did that. So the same thing with Iran. That is the reason why they want to have that nukes. But the people who are driving this whole thing within President Trump orbit, within the intelligence community right now, they either don't understand why Iran is driving that program, or they understand and they deliberately want to sabotage President Trump's agenda, and they want to cause this, rift, the schism between the GOP and the MAGA people, so that they can prove President Trump is not living by his promises, which got him elected. Here we go. Here's another foreign war. I don't know what the rationale is, but several things, like I said, do not add up. And we can go through these things that don't add up.
Okay, but let me ask you, if you think that Iran already has nukes, then aren't they justified in doing what they're doing? I mean, if it's true that Iran already has them, then they should have gone in, using their logic, they should have gone in yesterday, like way before now, before they got those nukes, they should have gone in, because that's the whole point. Like, that's what they're saying they're trying to do.
Who's justified? I'm sorry, I don't.
Well, the Israelis and the Americans apparently would be justified in going in, and according to their thinking, they're justified in going, because their whole thing is Iran can't have a nuke. A lot of us are saying, but they don't. So what are you doing? But if you're saying, but they do, then it seems to me like the Israelis, their intelligence, and Trump right now and the people around him, the warmongers, that they're right then. And they're saying we have to stop Iran from developing any more nukes, and we have to get the nukes that they already have. Of course, they don't want to say, if they already have nukes, they wouldn't want to say they already have nukes and we have to get the ones that they have, because that's very scary. Suddenly, if we find out that, wait a minute, Iran has nukes and you're going to wage war with them, so they could actually drop a nuke, that would be scary for the population. So they maybe withhold that information. But it seems that then their goal would be, we got to go in and prevent them from having any more nukes, and we got to get the couple that they have. And then it would sound justified to a lot of people.
So what I don't understand is the justification bit, because what is the actual, law or the document that says, one, a country cannot have a nuclear weapon, right?
Right.
So then the second point I want to make is that is my analysis, right? That I make it very differently in terms of how I look at things. I do holistic analysis. Let me also nuance it. When I say they got a couple, the second part of my primary analytic line is that Iran does not have a scalable operational capability. Yes, they can have like what a couple of nukes can do, right? It's a psychological weapon. It is not a battlefield capability.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the primary analytic line right now, or whomever that is driving this whole thing is, and I don't really know what their primary analytic line, because they're not saying it. They haven't declassified it. The one that I can tell you right now, and I can quote, and like I said, I went through every single ICA, the intelligence community assessment, that declassified national intelligence assessment, which is signed off by 18 agencies in my former agency, DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. And I will read to you exactly what that assessment says. And that assessment says is, we continue, and I quote, this is a direct quote from the 2025, we continue to assess Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and that Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program he suspended in 2003.
Right. So a little bit of contradiction there, but she holds up the possibility that Iran has a couple of nuclear weapons. It's not, and one nuclear weapon is all you need to create a nuclear holocaust in the Middle East, because Israel has had nuclear weapons since the 1960s. They've never publicly admitted it, but everybody knows it. Yes, Israel is a nuclear power, the only one in the Middle East, apparently. So what if Iran decides to just lob one over Israel? Well, that will be the beginning of a nuclear war, and it will enlarge very quickly. And we still don't know if China is going to intervene. Russia has got its hands full in Ukraine, but it could easily continue to send arms to Iran, and it's already doing that. So the situation is incredibly vulnerable, and we have got to watch this every day, and we're going to continue to do that. Thank you so much for watching today, as we did a little bit of international news, because believe me, this will affect you a lot more than what Mark Carney's doing on the weekend. And this is going to be the story that will dominate the news for either this conflict ends or engulfs the world, and then it's all over. Thank you for watching. I have been broadcasting live from Ottawa. Have a happy Sunday. Give your spouse, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your kids a hug today, and appreciate what this planet still has. And let's fight for peace.